Producer Joe here from the Working Fans Podcast. And at the Working Fans Podcast, this is just a podcast that three lifelong fans created to have a place to talk comedy and pro wrestling. Now, our comedy podcast releases every Tuesday, while our wrestling podcast releases every Thursday. We release bonus episodes under the moniker Working Fans Presents every now and then. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, any major podcast provider. The important thing is just please like, rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to us. Now, we have started a new thing. We are now on Amazon and Audible. So those episodes release every Monday. And that's kind of going through the archives and just releasing our old episodes in a new area. So if you want to live through the process with us again, take that journey with us again, you can find us over on Amazon and Audible. Now, if you can't get enough of us in the audio form, check out our YouTube. It's youtube.com/C/Working Fans Wrestling Pod, or just search Working Fans Podcast on YouTube. We have the whole archive is up there. And if you listen to the Working Fans Podcast, you are more than familiar with the 531. That is our signature segment where we take your top 5 lists on a particular subject, vote it down to a top 3, and then debate it down to a top 1. Now, guys, if you want to hear 3 guys talk shit about comedy, wrestling, life, anything, you will enjoy the Working Fans Podcast. Welcome back for another week of the Working Fans Podcast. And last week was such a huge week in wrestling between SummerSlam, CM Punk, TakeOver. But this week, we are going back to the past. And we are talking top 5 NWA/WCW Tag Team Champions. Dave, why'd you select
Old school, baby.
this list?
Old school. Love tag team wrestling, and at the end of the day, me and Jake actually talk about this era too of wrestling, like those early NWA, later WCW tag teams, where it was just on the cusp when the NWA eventually became part of World Championship. Even though I know NWA broke off and was still NWA, for the longest time, to me, WCW and NWA were kind of synonymous. So I wanted to have all those teams kind of grouped up into this, not just make it a WWF team or everything. Very specific, because I think the tag teams, when you think like the teams like the Midnight Express, the Steiner Brothers, Ron Simmons and Bush Reed. I mean, you're looking at just a great era of wrestling and that promotion.
Yeah, I'd say that late 80s, early 90s WCW, like where Bobby Eaton was big, even not necessarily with the Midnight Express all the time. That might have been his single run.
Yeah, 89 to maybe 93, 94. I mean, you're going to see some other teams on this list. Like, people did put the Outsiders and like Harlem Heat on there. Harlem Heat got there like around 94, but I was looking for that list. Yeah, that was my era. That early mid 80s, maybe even too. Like the Midnights and the Rock and Roll, and then later on the Steiner Brothers and Doom, and the Road Warriors were obviously right there too. But it's just like that.
Let's jump right into it. First list: Charlie Hill. He's got Harlem Heat, Outsiders, 4 Horsemen, Road Warriors, and Freebirds. Now, with 4 Horsemen, I'm going to assume Arn and Tully.
Yeah, I mean, that's who I would put in there if we had to represent a tag team out of the Horsemen, I don't think it gets better than Iron and Tully when you look at the fact that they were WWF and NWA Tag Team Champions. So,
Yep. And if you look at that list, that's just that prime era.
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, Iron and Ole was a great team as well. And, there are other teams that kind of came out of there. But honestly, I mean, we're not talking, it's not Paul Roma, NWA. No offense, Paul.
And I mean, we're going to have a later list where it's going to go farther back in time and then even more recent, because if you think about it, NWA is kicking right now, and some people are still a fan of those tag championships for them. What first list do you have today?
I got Jake St. John back in the house. He starts off with a little some notes here from Jake. I'm very well aware that I did not put the Rock and Roll Express on my list, and that's because I fucking hate them. So for that fact, they're disqualified for my list. So, in no order, Steiner Brothers, Road Warriors, Midnight Express, Hollywood Blondes. Looks like it is a tie. Fuck them all. These guys were the best. And then he's got the Horsemen, and specifically Anderson and Blanchard. And he also adds Jake Rule, Doom. He said, I love this topic, and Pretty Wonderful should have been on my list as well. And those are some great teams from NWA and WCW era.
Former guest of the show, Ricky Morton, disagrees, but
yeah. I mean, obviously, this is Jake's opinion. He wasn't a fan of the rock and roll back in the day. He's got like some good, like the Hollywood Blondes, and even an honorable mention to Doom. Like those are some good teams that might not get the recognition that they deserve throughout history. But obviously, there's the rest of those lists. I mean, Steiner Brothers, Midnight Express, Road Warriors. Come on.
Yeah. Kevin Irvine is back this week, and he's got Steve Williams and Terry Gordy, Doom, Harlem Heat, Midnight Express, and Rock and Roll Express.
So there you go. So rock and roll is going to be here. Sorry, Jake. Rock and roll was here to stay. Like my man Ricky Morton says, he's into women or horses. He rides
a Dooming.
That's what he said.
Yeah. Doom's making a lot of lists, which I like seeing. I was almost wondering if they were even tag champions before I started seeing the list roll in.
Yeah, they were. They actually won it from the Steiner Brothers at one point. I want to say they lost it to the Freebirds, though. The Freebirds were making a babyface run at that time, and I think they did get it back. I think they got it from Doom, which is interesting. Now I got Zach St. John next on here, and he's got Midnight Express, Road Warriors, Steiner Brothers, Rock and Roll Express. Sorry, Jake. Harlem Heat. And he did add that he's leaving Iron and Tully off, though they are one of my favorites of all time.
Wow, the real ZSJ coming through with a solid list there.
Yeah, and unbiased because, unlike his brother, no offense, Jake told us I'm leaving off the Rock and Roll Express. Fuck him because I hate him. Zach is like, I love Tully and Iron, but I can't put him above these teams that he mentioned. And, hey, I mean, all these teams he mentioned, Midnights, Road Warriors, Steiners, Rock and Roll, Harlem Heat. Damn, those are all elite teams, I'm
actually going to give you my list next because as much as I like Arn and Tully, they didn't make the cut for me either, and that's just because there are so many teams. And you got Midnight, Rock and Roll Express, Doom, Road Warriors, Steiners. So, I mean, if I was doing the Jake rule, I would throw Arn and Tully in that 6th spot.
Yeah, a team that people aren't going to mention, too, that I always think about this team, they had fun matches. I don't know if they ever won a tag belt. I don't think they did. But they had really fun matches with the Steiner brothers in this era and the Road Warriors, the Samoan SWAT team. The Samoan SWAT team, which later became the Head Shrinkers, were also just a fun, physical team. You also had other teams, too, from this era, too, like the Skyscrapers. In that era I'm talking about what I mean, like Steiner Brothers, Doom, and the Midnights. And we're here in that era. Because, like, the Midnights and the Rock and Roll stuck around for that Steiner Brothers and Doom, And also there's a short-lived Pillman Zinc. But anyway, yeah, I mean, we're hearing a lot of the same teams over and over again. Rock and Roll, Midnight, Steiner Brothers, Harlem Heat, Road Warriors.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting top 3.
Yeah, and now we got Randy Osgood coming at us with that Harlem Heat, baby, sucker. As I'm a fan of Booker T, just want to throw that in there. The Steiner Brothers, the Rock and Roll Express, Iron and Tully, and then he's got the Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk. Randy coming through.
Wow. Next up, I got Kevin Dignam from Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group. He's got Steiner Brothers, Arn and Tully, Midnight Express, Doom, and the Rock and Roll Express.
It's fun to see how many lists Doom are making. I don't know if I put everything aside, if Doom really belongs in there with some of these teams, because they were great, but they didn't have that lengthy run. But boy, they had the look, and boy, they had the talent.
Yeah, I think it's just got to be Ron Simmons. I mean, people are Butch Reed fans, but Ron Simmons, when they had the hoods, Teddy Long, I think, I don't know. I mean, they're on my list. Now you got me thinking about it. Like, shit, how are they making so many lists, and would they rank as one
It's
of them?
crazy. Like, we're honestly all just fans of them, and they resonated with the people who listen to our show, which is great. We're finding something about our fan base. We're all Doom fans, which is great. But yeah, putting my biases aside, like, I can't tell you that they should be mentioned with the Rock and Roll, Midnight, Road Warriors, and the Steiner Brothers, or even the Freebirds, who haven't made a list. I mean, Jimmy Garvin and Michael Hayes. I know it's not the original three, but they were tag team champions, and I feel like you could argue they belong on here. But anyway.
They're not making as many lists as you would think either.
No. I got Michael Flynn here. He's got, get this, the Steiner Brothers, Harlem Heat, on you like a steaming pot hot of neck bone. That's a quote from Stevie Ray. I had to do one for him too. Rock and Roll Express, Doom, once again, and the Outsiders, Hall and Nash, because they're too sweet. All right, a little shout out to them as well. So I don't know. I think that it's great to see Doom mentioned as much, but again, I'm really surprised. They're not going to make the final three, folks. I'm sorry. I can't do that in good conscience. But thank you for all the support.
Well, the next list I got, Dave Fabe is back. He's got Harlem Heat, Doom, Royce Isaacs and Tom Latimer, Aaron Stevens and JR Kratos, and Steve Williams. So you can see he's a fan of some of those newer teams.
Yeah, fuck that guy. Just kidding. Thanks for listening to the show, brother. I like Gordy and Williams. Now, you know what? Like, they won that NWA Tag Tournament later in the Bill Watts WCW era, and I have to say, they're again such a physical team, and they had to run in Japan and stuff. Williams and Gordy, and obviously I know it's a work, folks, but I'm just saying, in perspective, like it was something to watch at the time.
Well, it's that Road Warriors, Steiner Brothers, Williams and Gordy, like that big man toughness. That when you see two teams like that collide, it's like two bulls running into each other.
Now I got Michael Caldwell, former guest of the show, Mikey and Fred. He's got Harlem Heat, the Steiner Brothers, the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, and he ain't leaving them off their list. Iron Anderson and Tully Blanchard, the Horsemen, the Brain Busters, whatever you want to call them, they're on the list, and they deserve to be there.
Now, the last list I got for you is from Jason Gross from Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group. He's got the Steiner Brothers, the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express. He's got Arn and Tully. He's got Harlem Heat. And this motherfucker is calling in the Jake Rule. He calls it an honorable mention, but we know what it is. He's got the Nasty Boys.
The Nasty Boys. Yes, they were former WCW Tag Team Champions.
One of those technically held it, right?
It's interesting because, I think they dropped the belt to the Steiner Brothers. They did have it for a little while.
Actually, Nasty Boys would be another team in that. kind of Williams and Gordy, Steiner Brothers, Road Warriors, like hard hitting.
They had the AWA world titles in retrospect, I believe. I'd have to look this up.
I believe they did.
Yeah, AWA, WCW world titles, and I want to say, and they had the WWF world tag titles.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they had a run in Japan somewhere.
Yeah, I can't remember if they might even had the TNA titles as a favor from Hulk Hogan, but yeah,
that's a good question.
But yeah, they've had a run in the business, so it's funny to not hear them mentioned more. But yeah, I got two more lists, counting my own. Let's wrap this one up here. We got our boy from New Hampshire, Jesse. He always brings it. He's got Iron and Tully, the Road Warriors, the Steiner Brothers, the Hollywood Blondes. Jake's not the only one who picked them, and the Outsiders.
That's a good list.
Good list. I guess I'll wrap this bitch up. When you're looking at the best, you got to talk about Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express from this era. Sorry, Jake. Like, they're both synonymous with each other. And that NWA, WCW era of tag champions, these guys are going to make the list. The Road Warriors, just for the fact they're pure dominance in wrestling, and they held so many damn titles. And they from the NWA, WCW era as well, they got to make the list. The Steiner Brothers, they set a new era in wrestling and tag teams at that time, coming off the Midnights and the Rock and Rolls and the Road Warriors. The Steiner Brothers were definitely, they had the athleticism with Scott Steiner, the toughness between both of them, and it was off the page. And number 5, it's a lot of good teams. You can argue Doom, you can argue the Hollywood Blondes, but to me, around, don't get me wrong, I'm torn between Harlem Heat, but I'm going to give it to Anderson and Blanchard, and I'm putting them on the list.
All right, now we're looking at a top 3. Obviously, Midnight, Rock and Roll.
I'm going to go Steiners. Or maybe Road Warriors. I was going to say Steiners
or Road Warriors.
Yeah.
And I was thinking Road Warriors just for the longevity.
Yeah, no, you're right. That was me being biased. I'm a Steiner mark.
If we're going for the top ones, like Steiners would be 4.
Yeah, you gotta go Road Warriors.
And it's really between the Midnight and the Rock and Roll here because that's such a classic rivalry. What, U.S. Tag Championships?
Yeah.
Back and forth between them, World Tag Championships.
And when you get right down to it, depends how you want to look at it. If you go in longevity, you got to go Rock and Roll because they're still doing the shit today.
Yeah, they won it within the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. But then again, on the other hand, Midnight Express also had a run with the U.S. tag titles. They had some great main event matches. And I think if you just look at the matches they were able to have, and the mouthpiece with Jim Cornette, that whole package deal, man, I feel like Midnights are definitely the way to go. Like, I think they're probably the best. Like, it's funny, like, Anderson and Blanchard didn't get the run as a tag team, even though they got a great run as a team. But as a team, it's like, say, the Steiners and, Midnight and Rock and Roll. But if they did, let's say longevity, let's say they had those belts a lot more, to me, what separates Anderson and Blanchard is the same thing that separates the Midnight Express. Like, it's great tag team wrestling. It's what I think when I see, Cass Wheeler and Dax Harwood. It's great, synonymous, in and out tag team wrestling and putting on these clinics of matches. So, for my money, I give it for Midnight Express for that reason.
Yeah, and it's classic storytelling. It's the ultimate good versus evil. The crowd had no question what role both teams played. And like you said, Cornette was a good mouthpiece. So much so that when the Rock and Rolls went in the WWE Hall of Fame, Jim Cornette was called in to induct them. And I think that says something about that whole package presentation.
I agree.
Steve, you know what the music means.
Gotta get the hell out of here.
Midnight's won this. Before we get out of this, oh shit, the music's not even playing. I look like an asshole.
I'm just shaking my head. I'm ready.
Before we get out of this, how great was that CM Punk debut? At the time of the recording, it happened last night.
Yeah. So, what's funny about that, I have to say. he was so good. Like, you know, talking about, let me tell you a story, sitting down in the ring, and like getting into it with the crowd. But man, even better than that, whether it was done on purpose or maybe some of it was on purpose, some was on accident, but you can't get it bigger than doing that in Chicago. That was what made it insane, because you had grown men crying. And I don't know if that happens anywhere else but in Chicago. Like, Punk's a big deal anywhere else, but you do it in Chicago, it's one of the greatest things in wrestling.
Dude, I was a little emotional on my couch just because, like, when have we seen something that big and that genuine in wrestling where we got what we wanted?
And when he talked about it too, like, he never mentioned WWE by name, but he talked about how he had to leave that place to get healthy. That was an honest thing. This guy wasn't talking about being a prisoner or some, you know, wrestling promo. He talked about he had to leave for his own health. It was real. It was authentic. And, like, I believe him when he said he winged it. And he winged it so good. You know?
Yeah, I mean, he had to have some idea of what he wanted to say, like maybe just general bullet points, but God, to think that he just was winging that, it was like damn near perfect.
Yeah, it was. And it's interesting. The ice cream bars is such a great touch too.
Whether it be in the ring or out.
Okay. Came up with that. I thought that was so good.
There's one on eBay for about $1,000 US.
Fuck out of here. This is so insane. Yeah, I saw Tony Schiavone put on his Instagram. A lot of people ask me, what is the greatest night in our great sport? Here it is. And I thought, all right, Tony. I know you have a little fun. But it really does become a happening. Like, people are losing their minds right now. And it's because it's not just with CM Punk. That's a big deal. Punk was very successful in business. But it's also the way it debuted, how long he was gone, and then doing it in Chicago. You couldn't have done it better. And so for me, I was on the phone with someone at this time. I'm watching SmackDown, but I have, like, the voice off, because I'm not that, like, necessary to, like, I think SmackDown's a solid show, but, like, I had important calls I had to take, so I'm doing this, and I kind of have that, and then I'm, like, looking at it, and I'm like, oh shit, it's over, I gotta go see it, and I'm like a minute behind. I didn't realize that. So as soon as I tuned over, I see Punk right there in the entranceway, and I'm like, shit, and I have to, like, bite my tongue, because the person I'm talking to is not a wrestling fan, so I'm pausing it, and I'm having this conversation, and Joe doesn't realize this, but, like, he's one of the guys too. I'm having all my wrestling fans just text me, all my buddies, and I have this conversation for another 10 minutes or so, and it's just like beep, 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 notification. I'm like, motherfucker, guys, one, I don't want to look at this, I don't want to spoil anything, and two, like, this is like crazy. So I had to tell the person I was with, I'm like, you don't understand what's going on. This is like a tremendous happening in wrestling right now, and people are losing their minds. So fun
yeah, it was
story.
funny. My brother got home from work. My brother got home from work and he wanted to watch it. He didn't want any spoilers, so he's walking in the room, and I'm trying to set it up on Hulu, but it left off where I stopped watching with just Punk on the screen. I'm like, you got to get out of the room. And that's a spoiler alert in itself. Like, hey, get out of the room so I can rewind this. Like, oh, what do you want me to see? Right. Your perfection. But fans, we will talk to you again next week. Have a good one.
Later.
By defending its top prize against the likes of